This is the resumption of a public hearing requested by Peanut Gallery LLC in connection with property at 8 Hawthorne pursuant to zoning bylaw 7.2, requesting a variance with respect to a structure and property located at 8 Hawthorne Road. For the record, we, being the board and a number of parties, including the applicant and their attorney, attended a site inspection, commenced at approximately 5:45 and ended about 6:20. And I guess before we do anything else, I guess I'd like to see if there's anything the applicant, either through their attorney or directly, wants to bring to the board's attention or to discuss based on either what we saw during the course of our site inspection or anything that's developed since we were here last week.
Yes, I can be recognized. My name is Elizabeth Goodman. I'm an attorney in the law firm King Hibbert. We represent the Peanut Gallery. Last week, my fellow attorney, Brian Horan, was here. I was on Zoom from Palm Island. And today we met at the site which I hope really clarifies a lot of the questions I know the board raised last time. We also filed a letter dated August 8th to respond to questions that we felt the board had asked. We sent it to you digitally, and I have copies available for anybody who wants. I think there were two. I think we're all familiar with the criteria for a variance that this property has to meet, and we think does meet, that owing to circumstances relating to soil condition, shape, or topography of the land. And we saw how unusual the topography of this site is, with a lake that curves in the narrow property lines, but also the very high ledge, which is an unusual. And so we have met the first criteria, especially this land is generally affecting the zoning district. I don't think there are many other properties with these criteria that you raised last time would involve substantial hardship, financial or otherwise, to the petitioner. And so we addressed two questions in relation to that. I think one question that your board raised was, well, if you bought the house with a septic system that didn't work, why should that be a hardship? Well, the answer is everyone buys, the reason one buys a residential lot is to build a house. There was an existing house. And when you go to replace the existing house, you have to build a conforming septic system. So anyone who builds on this house needs a variance because you have many zoning bylaws that affect it, but particularly 6.18 requires the height of the wall in relation to the setback in a manner that you cannot construct a septic system on this site without a variance, if that wall is considered not in compliance with 6.1.8. And the board asked specifically whether you had to approve something that was only the minimum that you could build on the lot's size. I think that was a question that came up. And so Mark can give you the technical details. Mark Volk here for Foresight Engineering. But the minimum septic system anyone would build requires a wall and a mounded system on this lot. So in any case, a variance is required. We are asking for the variance for a septic system that serves 4 bedrooms. That's already been approved. All of these plans, of course, have been already approved by by the planning board, by the Conservation Commission. And the Tri-Town Septic has issued a permit for this system, right, Mark?
Yes.
And I think Mark can go into detail. You can ask more questions, but we believe that this is essentially the only configuration that you could make to build the septic system on the site. Nothing else perks. You have to have a perk, and it has to be mounted in order to build a house. And I think that everyone can agree that building a house on this residential site is in keeping with the zoning bylaw, generally speaking, and that there's no additional harm to any of the neighborhood or the neighbors from building a single family house. It's the best use of the site. It's the best design you're ever going to get for this site. It's been very carefully engineered and designed to fit into the contours of the lot. And as a result of that, in order to meet the LPOD setback, the house had to be moved. And on this, so on the west lake side, the current house is conforming, and so the non-conformity is on the west side, and we moved it back, so the proposed house will be conforming, and it makes sense from a planning perspective, from a site plan perspective, from an engineering perspective, and in terms of the abutting property, to have the setback reduced on the west side by the neighbor with the big ledge. So that's the dimensional variation. In order to build this house, we need a variance for the west, the east. I'm so bad at this. The east, because the meridian crosses this property, you call it east, southwest. It's been referred to as
Like,
the ledge side is where you need variance. That's the only nonconformity to your setbacks or to your zoning requirements. We meet all the other, the rear property setback is met, the lakeside setback is met, the floor area coverage is met. So there is no other requirement except if you consider this wall there, and there's, I think we have a footnote. Well, there's a deeper description of, yeah, so on page 2 of the last report, a whole of approximately 60 linear feet of the wall would be non-conforming. So it's not as long as the wall, right? Only because the wall curves around and it's in varying height, and your bylaw requires varying height as when it gets going back, when it gets closer to the road. So this septic system wall only has saw the edge of the road. It will not be visible. It will be vegetated, and there's already existing vegetation and a fence on town property that will remain. So that wall, if constructed, will not be visible. Nor will it be visible from the adjacent property, Mr. Silver's property. He's on the call, he's on the meeting Zoom call, and he has submitted a letter saying he doesn't object, and we all went with his permission on his property and looked at it, and you couldn't see the tape where the septic wall was laid out on the Peanut Gallery property. So it's not visible from any location. And that is why we think it's minimum request that is reasonable to construct this house and that won't have an adverse effect. And I don't know if you have any more questions for me, or if there's anything in our application or supplemental response that is unclear or that you're uncertain about, but I'm happy to answer questions.
Sure, I have a couple of questions. The first being, in the letter of August 8, 2022, addressed to me and the rest of the board, Attorney Horan makes the comment, the only nonconformity presented by the proposed retaining wall is its height. Well, my understanding is that this wall would be constructed how far from the street?
I think we ask for height and setback distance.
Because it doesn't say that in the
It's
letter.
really the setback distance that is the nonconformity.
Right. I don't think the height at 8 feet is the nonconformity in itself.
Well,
To our understanding, it's just the setback that's the nonconformity.
No,
Well, no.
No.
What Mr. Horan said was the only nonconformity presented by the proposed retaining wall is its height.
Okay.
And, you can clarify this for me if you could, Ned, but my understanding is that it was a 4-foot height in the front and 6 feet height for fence in the sides. Is that right?
That's correct.
All right. And this wall, this retaining wall, which it's been explained to us is necessary in order to effectuate this septic system, would be about 10 feet from the roadway, which would be a nonconformity requested, given the fact there's a 50-foot requirement that nothing be there for the first 50 feet in the front of the property. Am I correct?
Yes, so I would clarify the request. You are correct that we are requesting a variance for the setback, that the wall would be built within 10 feet of the road, and for the height that it doesn't meet section 6.18. But the wall itself is what the design of the wall is what we're seeking the variance to construct.
Can I add a clarification? It's not 10 feet from the road, but 10 feet from the property line.
Property line, yes.
Does anybody else have any questions of the applicant?
The one question, and sort of directed to Ned, is a retaining wall considered a fence?
It's a structure.
Okay,
It requires a permit.
okay.
Building permit, to be clear.
I have a question. I mean, throughout the discussion here, the thought has been that this is basically the only configuration that would work where the property is pretty much useless. That's kind of what I've been hearing. Requiring a septic system of this size and scope to support a house of this size. Just to clarify that point, what could you do if you had a 3-bedroom, 1,500 square foot house here on this property? I mean, I'm just saying, is the only possible scheme the one that you've got? Or what would happen to a septic system to support a house that was 1,500 square feet, 3-bedroom house on this property?
You would still retain the jet bat system, so you're reducing the elevation. And then the system would get smaller.
So we looked at that, if I may, Mr. Chairman, answer the question as well. We examined reconfiguration of the septic system to meet the state minimum, which is a 3-bedroom design. And instead of an 8-foot wall, which we've already demonstrated is not visible from the road or the neighbor, you would still need a 6-foot wall.
And how far back from?
It would be the same
About
location.
20, no, it brings it back from the property line. So I went through this analysis. I mean, he's looking for a 4-bedroom. but,
Yes.
So it brings it back 20 feet, so another 10 feet.
Okay, all right.
And it would still have a 6.3 foot wall there.
Right.
And to add clarification to the wall change, because the wall meets the profile of topography, would change its height. 6 feet is the maximum height, but it's not.
Yeah.
That's a one.
Right.
Yes, I realize it would still slope down.
Much like the 8-foot, it sits there and does.
As it
this.
goes up the driveway and towards the ledge.
Another point that is that there's no other place in the whole lot where a septic could be installed. The location of the septic, we're talking about the wall, but in reality, we're talking about the septic. And given the fact that there's no sewer in that service that lot, you need to build the septic. Given the topography, you have to build the wall.
No, I agree. I just wanted to know that theoretically you could have a 6-foot wall that was 10 feet further into the property with a house of the size I described. I just wanted to
That is correct.
put out there something that the idea that this was the only possible thing that could work. Logic tells me, well, something else might work.
It works the same basic design.
Yeah.
You're just shortening the trenches. The septic system by Mass Title V code needs to be in the area where the test pits were done.
Right.
So.
All right. Okay. Thank you.
Therefore, no matter.
We designed the house based on the coverage, based on the acreage of the house. So even that's the allowable size of the house, we designed a proportional septic.
And I think, I'm pretty sure you said this in other words in the last meeting, but is it fair to say that no matter what reconstruction would require a retaining wall that would need a variance? It's just a matter of exactly the location. Is that an accurate statement? Or is there a septic system whose retaining wall would not require a variance?
So what's driving the elevation of this whole thing is the separation to high groundwater.
I understand. Yeah, you did an amazing job describing that. You do not need to do that again. It
And
was
so
very
that
helpful.
is, that's what's driving the elevation of the septic system, and the septic system is a flat thing, and as you were out there, it's on a slope. So you take the highest point and you have to work your high groundwater elevation off of that. So it's gonna have whatever you put out there, and we've already reduced it down by 2 feet. That's the maximum you're gonna get out of Title V or the state or Tri-Town Health.
So the answer is yes, no matter what.
It's gotta go there.
Which is why we didn't respond by coming back with a new septic design for several reasons. One is that if you invest in this difficult site and build a house, realistically, you want to build a house that is got room for your family and a guest. I mean, we're in Lenox, you got guests coming, you don't want to pretend that you're building a 3-bedroom house when you're building a 4-bedroom. You want to have better to have a septic design that has the capacity for what you are going to be using it for. And it is an improvement in the value of the house to say you have a 4-bedroom septic design. And so they carefully considered, should we go in and say, okay, we're doing 3-bedroom, but we didn't think that was appropriate. We thought it was a better project to bring to the board to ask for relief to say, we're really building a 4-capacity septic system. You won't have overflows into the precious resource areas, you won't have breaches, you're having a functioning system that is designed with good capacity. And because you can't see the wall from the road, we felt that there was no adverse additional issues with building this wall that's vegetated, whether it be 2 feet higher or lower. It didn't matter, it wasn't material in our view of the site. The board, we're welcome to hear the board, and if you were to say to me, oh, let's take a straw poll, we're not going to approve the variance, it has a 4-bedroom capacity, but we will approve a variance if it has a 3-bedroom capacity, we'll withdraw if you tell me to do that and come back to you with a 3-bedroom. We don't want you to deny it on that basis because you feel like there's something going on with this design. We really did look at that issue and really felt that this was appropriate for the site and that you could support it for the request that we're making. But I'm listening if you have objections.
Well, just think of the meetings we've had where people are dealing with fences on the front of their property. We've had people removing fences because they were, 6 feet when they should only be 4 feet, and our approval of a structure of this size only gives something that people can point to when they have their own unique issues. I realize you have a very complex septic system on the other side of that wall, and it's necessary to support the property. I'm just saying that.
I want to be careful that you're making
You're in the law, so you understand
I totally understand.
precedent and what people will point to. So it's just something that weighs on us a little
And
bit.
I'm saying that not many people are going to point to this because it's vegetated and concealed. It's very different than a fence. And across the street from this house, as you saw when you're getting into your car, is a stockade fence that is non-conforming. And I think that's probably why your town adopted that bylaw to say everybody has to stop putting their 6-foot stockade fence right on the road. That's not what this is doing. That's not what this project is. That's not the purpose of the wall. That's not the approach. It's just different than that situation.
I understand.
That is. So did I miss, did sewer and water say that you couldn't hook up to the sewer and water? Did they not give you permission to do that?
Well, it would be, I went through an analysis, the septic system in the wall is going to be about probably $70,000, and go to the sewer is probably $200,000 if it's just a minimal 1.5. But once we go into the sewer, into this town way, likely the town's going to sit there and say, well, and this is mostly for just, you're going to have to go to have a 4-inch force main and then put your own 1/2-inch force main through there, because one single family on this side of the causeway, and we'd have to pump all the way over to south of Bean Hill Road. because that's where the gravity sewer is. There is sewer right on the other side of the causeway, but it's a low pressure sewer. And the configuration of this wouldn't work. And when I talked to Tony Campetti, he was like, no, you'd have to go, he wants you to go to this, the gravity sewer. The town has no discussion right now, serious discussion of doing this. I think the discussion I had with Tony Campetti and Peter Sosha were that, who was on the Sewer and Water Commission. They're interested in getting sewer over there, but the town's not interested in paying for it. Town's interested in having Camp Mackinac, White Pines, Wheatley, and the community over there paying for it. And it's a much bigger project than just a single family house. We don't have sewer. I think that's.
Yeah, if I might add, should sewer be in the future available? Everyone knows that houses on septic are required to connect to the sewer. So.
We did.
No, that's not true. You're not required to hook into the septic system as long as you pass Title V. 18 years of the Sewer and Water Commission.
Okay, but I know other towns that have required
I can only
that.
speak to the town we're in. Okay, maybe they do something different in Lennox, but that's,
And
that's the way
it's
it-
optional, but there is a statute which says that you must.
yeah, well, that might be true, but I can only tell you how it worked in the 18 years I was.
Very good. I'm sorry,
Yeah, so, I mean, what I was referring to was like on East Main Street, there were people over there that had problems with their septics, and they ran the sewer down from Yale Hill Road down to their house. You know, it wasn't, if it's a cost factor, no, if it's $200,000 or $1,000, I mean, is that a hardship? I don't know.
I think it would be way more than if you went to
I
start,
mean, if you look at the scale of the project,
yeah.
you put it in its totality.
Tony told me that to connect to the sewer would be in excess of $1 million.
It'd be way above the 200,000. The $200,000 is just this facility getting across there, boring, because you're gonna have to bore all the way through. You'd have to go through wetland permitting, numerous permits. So my $200,000 is,
And the low pressure system wouldn't work because
yeah.
grinder
that's-
pump and low pressure.
it's a complication of getting in there. And I see, if we go into,
Such a tiny pipe.
typically, when you go and do this, you're going into the town right away, and you're going to run a sewer line to probably south of Bean Hill Road. It's about 300 feet, 400 feet south. They're gonna say, you must put that line in per town specifications for the future uses. That's usually how it goes. So it's not like we're taking a 1 1/4 line and just pouring across the causeway and tying into the low pressure sewer. We'd have to do it per the town requirements if we're in, if we're in the town way.
So it's a,
They may allow the 1 1/4, but I think reasonableness on this project is there's no sewer there. There's no sewer there. There's nothing proposed, and there's nothing proposed within the next few years.
And so I take it that, I think it's kind of referred to, that part of the hardship would be, I mean, if you had to connect to the sewer, the difference between that and the septic field would be a large number, and it would be a hardship. I mean, I'm just putting,
Yes.
using a term that's a variance term.
Yes, the financial or otherwise, yes.
Yeah, my question for you, Attorney Goodman, is in assessing whether something constitutes a financial hardship, is the analysis comparing to the alternative, in this case, the septic system, or is the analysis, does it take into consideration the overall cost and whether this particular cost is a sort of a percentage of the overall cost? Is that a relevant factor that courts consider when examining variances?
I can't answer that. I haven't seen a case that said because the project is very expensive and you're required to do this very expensive part of it, that doesn't constitute a hardship. So in other words, to answer your question, I don't believe that it's relevant to say this is an expensive project and adding 200,000 is not. I don't think that's the standard of law.
But 200,000 is for the gravity sewer. Is that what you're saying?
Anything that goes, any sewer system would have to be a pressurized sewer system.
So it's gonna be more than.
Have to be, because, but you just said that it was a possibility if the town approved a low pressure system, which is 1.25 inch pipe. If that was possible, it would be way cheaper for them, right? Than 200,000 for a gravity.
No,
No.
no. So
Okay.
if you just took a 1.25 inch pipe
Yeah.
or 1.5 inch pipe, whatever the
Right.
size would have to be, you don't want to have a lot of fluid in that. That alone would be the $200,000. You're gonna be going and putting a pump station in, that'd have to be a substantial pump station with a high, probably a large horsepower pump to get that distance. It's not a lot of elevation, but distance. And then you have to go that distance. So if, say the town said, okay, we're gonna allow you to put in a 1.25 inch pipe. Gravity sewer line. So we're just going to a gravity sewer line, discharging to a gravity sewer line. But that whole line would have to be a private, small diameter sewer force main. That alone would be probably $200,000.
And I've never seen, and I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman, your experience as water sewer commissioner may, vary this, but I have never seen a homeowner be allowed to put in just the 1.25 inch line for an extended period of time in the public streets. It's not.
I'll pipe in and say they do allow it. So they're
Yes.
allowed, but
Yeah.
it's not typically allowed for, this is almost, I'm not gonna put the number out there, but it's over 1,000 feet. It's like 2,000 feet.
Well, there is another issue that you have too, is, well, you have a number of houses in that area, including Mackinac. And what we've seen, at least what I saw in 18 years as sewer and water commissioner, is neighbors would sometimes get together and pool their resources. And that's what happened in Brookside, which is development in Interlaken. And they set up their own private sewer line. And then they basically requested the town take it over. Obviously, if you do that, you have to make sure that you install a sewer line that's going to be copacetic with Tony Campetti and the crew at Water and Sewer. But one option, and we've certainly seen it throughout our town, is pooling your resources with neighbors and to see if there's any interest on their part. And one of the other things I've seen too is people who have spoken to neighbors or abutters, and that hasn't worked out, and they said, we're not interested. Well, they go and they put them their sewer line, and they do it such that it's consistent with what's required by the town. And then all of a sudden, the other neighbors decide that's such a great idea, and they're basically held hostage, and they end up working out reasonably well. And I can tell you that's happened 3 or 4 times, at least in neighborhoods in Stockbridge. So to me, that at least would be something that I would think about. And I do know from speaking when I was a sewer and water commissioner, that there was some talk about trying to get the good folks of Wheatley, White Pines, and the camp there to consider joining forces to see about hooking into the connection that you just mentioned, it being Hill. So it's a possibility.
We explored that. I mean, we did discuss that, but it's not something that's going to happen within a year or 2 years or 3 years. I mean, that type of something like that's going to be 4 years down. It's a long ways away.
Does anybody else have any questions of the?
Yeah, one question. If it were a 3-bedroom, or if the existing building with deck and the arrangement for a 3-bedroom sewage system could the existing house be picked up and put down in such a way that it would be conforming?
No.
Say that again. I'm sorry.
Right. Well,
Show me that.
sure. If you, based on the septic field and the paraphernalia,
Mhm.
and then the setback to the closest the building could be, with this existing structure, could it be picked up and moved back in such a way that it would stay out of the lake and pond overlay district and the setbacks?
No, we did look at that. So any house that meets the lake and pond overlay in this location and meets the setback from the ledge side will be very, very narrow. It was like 18 from outside wall to outside wall. So with any kind of construction, you'd have a very narrow room. And you know, this.
And the existing is 20, right?
Yeah.
what someone said.
existing is
Well,
20
plus the deck.
E,
Yeah, I think
so-
this one shows sort of that scenario. So this is 50 feet.
Right,
This is 50 feet. This is the LPOD
right.
and 50 feet and 50 feet. And there's the existing house. So you really can't take that and put it there because the house is 20 feet in dimension right here. And
Right,
that's about 18 feet here,
And the.
if that's what you were getting to.
right.
And the septic field pushes the it intrudes into the existing house, if you can see the dotted line.
Right.
Right, so
Mhm.
already you have to build, that's why we said anyone who builds on this site will need a variance.
I believe the answer to your question is a reduced septic system for a 3-bedroom rather than 4 only pushes the septic wall
10 feet.
10 feet back. It doesn't change the location of the house because the septic system needs to be at a certain elevation and per the grade of that.
Right.
It's going to stay in the same place, just
Right.
slide further, just be shorter, but not further one way or the other.
Do we have any questions or comments from anybody listening in on Zoom that wish to be heard, or anybody here in the audience?
Is the total square footage of the house 6,560 feet? Is that correct?
That's right.
What is that here in this?
I think it's.
I mean, that's what I'm looking at the table.
The square footage.
Am I voting on this?
Yeah, so the.
Right now, right now.
Catherine's an alternate now.
10.
Catherine, was-
Yeah, Catherine.
The total square footage of the house. Garage.
That's clear.
I assumed it, but I just realized it better to settle it now than later.
Oh, that's the chart.
Zoning table for existing.
Yeah, so
You asked.
so the combination of all the floors.
All the floors.
All the
Livable space.
livable space
Garage,
is 6,560
560.
feet.
but that's because it's long and all of the length is conforming. It's just this.
We're still meeting. I
side
mean, we meet
and
the,
this.
we meet the mass, it's 17.4.
No, I get it. I'm just trying to get a grasp of the size of the house.
Yes, Mr. Strauss?
My impression from hearing the select board when it considered this matter, and for that matter, also the planning board and the conservation commission, is that at that time, the only issue that was thought to be necessary for your decision is the issue that Mr. Silver has already agreed to, the proximity of the building to his property line. And while I appreciate the concern about septic system, I would have it too. You're getting an extraordinarily well-designed unit that will offer the protection of the lake and others that is called for.
Anyone else have any questions or comments? Okay, at this point, I guess I'm gonna close the meeting with respect to outside comments and open the meeting with respect to discussion amongst the board members. Anybody have any observations they want to share with the rest of the board with respect to the application?
Well, Tom, the key issue for me is, is the, could you ever put the existing house, back into place and be conforming? And that, probably is the key for me. The other question is on the other side, what has caused the issue, of, hardship? What and where is the hardship? And, even though the meeting's closed, can you address that, as to what has triggered and to what extent is the hardship?
Let's finish our discussion and then we'll
Okay.
let them answer that question.
Okay.
All right, Jim, maybe we should have asked.
Right.
Closed everything up. I
Right.
apologize. Catherine, do you have any thoughts or observations?
It's a pretty high, my understanding, and I am new to this board, but my understanding of variances and the way Stockbridge has historically interpreted the letter of the law is that it's a pretty high bar to get the variance. I think everyone in the room understands that. But I think that, and they're very rare because of that, I have been pretty well convinced that this project does indeed meet all of the criteria. Certainly topography and the size and structure of the land. I don't see any substantial detriment to the public good, neighbors, abutters, et cetera. Was very much convinced of that. The one prong, if any, that there is even a little bit of doubt would be in the true definition of what constitutes substantial hardship under the law. I mean, there's no doubt that it would be much more expensive to not put in a septic system. So I would love to hear what the rest of the board thinks about that.
John, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah. One of the things I raised the last meeting was responded to in the supplemental memorandum sent to us. And that is whether or not we are required to grant the minimum variance, right? That the minimum departure from existing zoning requirements that would relieve the hardship. And that comes into play when we start talking about whether or not the house could be limited to 3 bedrooms, and therefore there would be a different impact upon the size of the septic field. It's been clearly explained what the difference would be. If one were to apply the hardship requirement strictly, one could say allowing only 3 bedrooms would eliminate the hardship. That 3 bedrooms with a reduced end size of the septic field. I see so little to be gained by the community if that is done. And there is, and this doesn't quite answer the question, but I heard Ms. Goodman say, and I think maybe someone else said, that it wouldn't be a bad idea to have the kind of extra capacity in the septic field. I'm going to say something I may regret, is that I've been very happy with my septic field. But one of the last things in the world I want is to have to reconstruct that septic field. So again, applying a strict interpretation of hardship. One could say, no, because a smaller septic field could be built with only 3 bedrooms, but I'm disinclined to go that way.
And a variance would still be required. It's just the details of it would be different.
Yep.
Patty, do you have any thoughts?
I think it's the septic system as opposed to a fence is almost 2 different things. A septic system for around the lake is extremely important, and this is top of the line septic system. And I know this from being a real estate agent. And, you know, it's a fabulous system that the Massachusetts has accepted. So I know that it has been brought up that the actual blocks, the concrete blocks that are stepping back, I think it's correct that that they're going to put vegetation, I guess you can plant inside of them. I think that's going to make a huge difference. So we won't have this stockade fence that's sticking in our faces close to the road. I don't think that there's a problem with the other side. The neighbors have no problem with it. And when we walked back there, there was a steep grade that was still owned on the other side of the ledge nearer the neighbor's yard. And the neighbor is very happy with this. You could not see the lines, the tape that was up that would be the house. So I do think that there would be a hardship, as we discussed, with the cost of sewer. So that's all I have to say.
Yeah.
Mark, any questions? Or
Well, I found that having a site visit was extremely helpful because even though you guys talked about ledges and property and all that, it was very helpful to see why the design is the way it is. And it's a very impressive design. I think the wall with the vegetation and the existing vegetation and trees that are going to be preserved addresses one of my concerns. And it's not a fence. It has a very practical, essential, role to play here in having a state-of-the-art septic system, so that people who may want to raise this as an issue dealing with their front fence, their picket fence or something, we can certainly say, well, this is a very different situation. I think the ledge showing a little encroachment towards the property line on the east side clearly is taken care of by that ledge and the view we had from the neighbor's house. I like all the trees between the house and the water. I think that was the ones you're preserving there. It looks very good to me. And I think it looks like a stunning design. So from my opinion, I think you've met the requirements of a variance. I think having to wait 3 or 4 years for some kind of a maybe sewer system seems like something that would be a hardship, a substantial hardship to wait that long. I don't think it has a negative impact on the overall neighborhood and the area. So I think, to me, it meets the requirements of a variance.
I have a few thoughts. I look at this issue from a slightly different angle. I mean, under MGL Chapter 40A, Section 10, there are basically 3 requirements that you have to meet in order to grant a variance. And to Catherine's point, I am very cognizant of the fact that variances are granted, on a, shall we say, not an infrequent basis. And I guess my issue with the variance application really centers on the 3rd statutory requirement. That is, that the variance can be granted without substantial detriment to the public good and without nullifying or substantially derogating from the intent and purposes of the zoning bylaw. What we have here is we have an existing nonconformity where we have a structure that with respect to the west side of the property presently is non-conforming. The applicant wants to erect a new house and create the non-conformity on the opposite or east side. So they're essentially creating a new non-conformity and dispatching or removing an existing non-conformity. I'm not sure I've ever seen that in my experience as a ZBA person. I'm not sure, I know that I'm not familiar with any statutory or legal authority or case law that suggests that a zoning board has the authority to substitute one nonconformity with another. I understand the argument that what's the big deal? If anything, it's really de minimis given the circumstances, but I think that's a factor that I have to think about. And given the fact that variances are granting sparingly, I feel much more comfortable if there was some authority permitting me to do so. But I understand that argument. But I think what I'm more troubled by is there's a variance requested with respect to the side lots. But we're also looking at a variance with respect to the placement of a retaining wall 10 feet from the property line. Again, a variance from the setback requirements clearly outlined in our zoning bylaws. In addition to that variance, that is putting this structure, which at various points measures 8 feet high to 6 feet high, you're looking at a circumstance that this extends over 68 linear feet of nonconformity. And I guess I respectfully differ with Mark with respect to what sort of precedent that creates. And I guess from my perspective, we have zoning bylaws and we have setback requirements outlined in those zoning bylaws. And there's a reason for these setback requirements. And I think that in a circumstance like this, to grant a variance under these circumstances, with this sort of retaining wall, 10 feet from the property line, measuring 8 feet at various points down to 6 feet, really substantially undercuts the whole purpose of having a bylaw and the intent of the bylaw. I think it detracts from and undercuts and departs from the purpose and intent of the framers of our bylaw. And frankly, I'm reluctant to depart from that because I think it's a very slippery slope. And when I'm looking at this, I can't just look at this particular circumstance. I have to say, well, what happens the next time somebody comes with a project like this? What do I do there? And they do point to this. And yes, we can make distinctions saying, well, this is protected by shrubbery and it's tasteful and it's this and it's not an ugly fence and somebody's aesthetic opinion. That's, to me, something I'm very conscious of. With respect to the whole issue of substantial hardship, I guess from my perspective, I read the case cited by Attorney Moran, and I think that one cannot look at the fact that somebody had knowledge of this condition when purchasing as a sole reason to say this is that they did not meet the substantial hardship requirements. It is also a factor that can be considered. How you weigh that, I don't know, because I think my feeling with respect to this variance is I think it fails on the statutory requirement that such a variance would actually substantially derogate and diminish and undercut the purpose and intent of our setback bylaws. Anybody else have any other questions? I know, Jim, you wanted to have an answer.
Well, actually, I think I've answered that for myself. To address your issues, in studying the drawings, it is my understanding that there cannot be a septic system anywhere on the property that could support the minimum, which would be a 3-bedroom. So if it's in this position, it has to have a retaining wall. And that retaining wall would have to be at least 6 feet high, if I understand this correct. Is that right, Mark? And it could be moved back an additional 10 feet. So it would get back to 20. But in both those conditions, it still would be non-conforming. The taking that and taking the existing building, and I've been playing with this for the last week, and trying to pick it up, and in this case, including the deck, because I believe that's part of the structure, and putting it outside the Lake and Pond overlay district, there is no way it could go in conforming in my, measurements here, which, I would say if you can't pick up and use the existing one to be conforming, then it would be difficult not to create a hardship.
Have any questions or comments? At this point, is the board ready to vote?
I am.
Okay, I guess at this point, I'm going to call for the board to vote and understand that in order for a variance to be granted, the board has to vote by a majority of 4-1. And a vote yes would be a vote to grant the variance. I'll start with you, Mark.
All right, I vote yes to grant.
Patty,
I vote yes to grant.
Jim,
I vote yes. There would be a hardship.
John,
Yes.
and I vote no. The variance application is to be granted by a vote of 4-1. We'll have a decision within the next 7 to 10 days.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and if you need any drafts, if you like that, drafts findings,
No, we do that.
okay, very good. Thank you.
you.